The air in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel doesn't just smell like money, it smells like power. It's a heady mix of vintage Dom Perignon Dior, J'adore, and the subtle, almost undetectable scent of ironclad prenups. For most, it's a night of fantasy. But for one man, Nathan Holloway, standing in a rented tuxedo that feels two sizes too small for his ambition, it's a courtroom where he's both prosecutor and judge. His eyes are locked on his ex-wife, a woman who looks more radiant than he ever remembered. And in his hand, a glass of deep red Merlot isn't just a drink. It's a verdict he's about to deliver. The Metropolitan Benefactors Gala was the glittering apex of New York's social calendar, a place where last names were currency and fortunes were philanthropic shields. To Nathan Holloway, it was hell dressed in Valentino. Every clink of crystal, every burst of polite laughter scraped against his raw nerves. He wasn't supposed to be here. A mid-level consultant at a firm that was respectable but invisible in this stratosphere, he'd secured a ticket through a corporate lottery. A cruel joke by the universe. His gaze cut through the sea of couture and surgically perfected smiles, landing, as it always did, on her. Sophia Rossi, his Sophia. Or rather, the woman who used to be. She stood near the silent auction, a vision in an emerald green gown that clung to her like a second skin. The dress probably cost more than his car. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, revealing the graceful line of her neck, and a pair of diamond earrings that scattered light with every slight turn of her head. She was laughing a genuine, unburdened sound that he hadn't heard since their early years. It was a sound he once believed he was the sole architect of. Now it was a testament to his absence. They had started with nothing but a shared dream in a cramped Brooklyn apartment. He the ambitious business student, she the brilliant art history major with a fire in her eyes. He'd supported her through her master's degree, worked 2 jobs so she could curate a small, unpaid gallery show. He saw it as an investment in their future. He was building the financial foundation. She was building the cultural prestige. Together, they would be a power couple. But somewhere along the way, the blueprints had changed. Her career took off with an unexpected velocity. A review in the New York Times, a mentorship with a gallery magnate, and suddenly, Sophia was a name whispered in circles he couldn't even get past the velvet rope to see. He'd been proud at first, then threatened. Her world expanded, filled with artists, collectors, and thinkers who spoke a language of aesthetics and philosophy he didn't understand. His world of spreadsheets and profit margins seemed a dull pedestrian. He started to pick fights, accusing her of forgetting where she came from, of looking down on him. He saw condescension in her every suggestion, pity in her every glance. The truth, a truth he kept buried deep beneath layers of pride, was that he had stopped growing. He was the same Nathan Holloway from college, while she had evolved into a masterpiece of her own making. The divorce was her final brutal brushstroke. Now, watching her command the attention of a circle of admirers, the bitterness churned in his gut like acid. He saw her as a thief who had stolen the life he was supposed to have. She had used his sweat and sacrifice as a launchpad, and then jettisoned him the moment she reached orbit. That was the story he told himself, the narrative that fueled his waking moments and haunted his dreams. He navigated toward the bar, his movements stiff. "Merlot," he grunted, not meeting the bartender's eye. The deep red liquid swirled in the glass, dark and menacing. His heart hammered against his ribs. He watched her across the room, a goddess on a pedestal he felt he had built. And he, the forgotten laborer, was left in the dust. A familiar rage, cold and sharp, began to crystallize within him. It was the rage of the inadequate, the fury of the left behind. He wasn't just going to leave. He couldn't. He needed to leave a mark, a stain, something to prove he was still there, that he could still affect her world, even if it was just to mar its perfect surface. He started walking toward her, the merlot sloshing gently in his hand. Each step was deliberate, a drumbeat of impending confrontation. The crowd seemed to melt away, the ambient noise fading into a low hum. It was just him and her. He saw her glance up, her eyes registering his approach. For a fleeting second, a flicker of something surprise anxiety crossed her face before being replaced by a mask of cool, polite neutrality. That mask infuriated him more than anything. "Nathan," she said, her voice even, "I didn't expect to see you here." "I get around," he said, his own voice sounding harsh and foreign in the opulent air. He gestured vaguely with the wineglass. "Looks like you're doing well. This is a long way from that fifth-floor walk-up in Bushwick." The jab landed. He saw it in the slight tightening of her jaw. "We all have to start somewhere," she replied, her tone still measured. "It's good to see you, Nathan. I hope you're well." She was dismissing him, a polite social nicety to brush him aside like a piece of lint on her designer gown. All the years, all the sacrifice reduced to a pleasantry. The rage that had been crystallizing now superheated, turning molten. "Well," he scoffed, a humorless laugh escaping his lips. "I'm not the one engaged to a billionaire Sophia, but I guess that was always the goal, wasn't it? Find a bigger back to climb on." Her eyes, once warm and full of life, turned to ice. "Don't do this, Nathan. Not here." "Do what?" "Tell the truth," he spat, leaning in closer, lowering his voice to a venomous whisper. "I paid for that degree. I worked my fingers to the bone while you were sipping Chardonnay with patrons of the arts. You owe me. This life you have, part of it is mine." It was the lie he had polished until it shone brighter than the truth. He saw the flash of hurt in her eyes quickly replaced by a steely resolve. "You owe yourself a reality check, Nathan," she said, her voice dangerously low. "The only thing I owe you is my silence about why we really ended. And trust me, you want me to keep paying that debt." Her threat, her utter lack of fear, was the final spark. All reason evaporated. In his mind, he wasn't a bitter ex-husband in a rented tux. He was a righteous avenger, here to collect. He saw only the emerald dress, the smug poise, the stolen future. Without another thought, he flicked his wrist. The world seemed to slow for a moment. The dark red wine arced through the air, a perfect liquid projectile. It felt like an eternity before it made contact. Part 2. The Stain and the Silence. The merlot struck the front of Sophia's gown with a wet slapping sound that was shockingly loud in the sudden pocket of silence that formed around them. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the deep burgundy began to bloom against the vibrant emerald fabric. It spread like a grotesque dark flower, tendrils of red, creeping down the designer silk, dripping onto the polished marble floor. A few drops spattered onto her neck and chest, clinging to her skin like beads of blood. Gasps rippled through the immediate vicinity. Conversations stuttered and died. Heads turned. The collective gaze of New York's elite, a force with the weight of a physical blow, zeroed in on the tableau, the stunned woman in the ruined dress, and the man standing before her, his empty hands still slightly raised, a triumphant, ugly sneer twisting his lips. In that moment, Nathan felt a surge of pure, vindictive power. He had done it. He had shattered the illusion. He had reached up to her pedestal and dragged her, if only for a moment, into the mud with him. The perfect, untouchable Sophia Rossi was now the center of a vulgar spectacle, stained and humiliated. He had proven he still mattered. Sophia didn't scream. She didn't cry out. She simply stood, frozen, her hand hovering near her chest, as if she could somehow stop the stain from spreading through sheer force of will. Her face was a canvas of shock and disbelief. Her eyes were wide fixed on him, and in their depths he saw not just hurt, but a profound, soul-deep weariness. It was the look of someone who had fought a long private war only to see the enemy reappear on a public battlefield. "Are you satisfied?" she whispered, her voice trembling but not breaking. The The question, so devoid of the hysterics he had expected, pricked his bubble of triumph. Around them, the whispers grew louder, turning from curious to condemnatory. Good heavens, did you see that? Who is that man, That's Sophia Rossi, the curator. What an absolute savage! The words were like tiny daggers, finding the chinks in his armor of rage. He had wanted to humiliate her, but he hadn't fully considered the splash zone. The judgment wasn't just on her, it was a tidal wave directed at him. He was no longer the righteous avenger. In the eyes of the $100 million crowd, he was a brute, a nobody who had committed the ultimate social sin, causing a scene. He tried to hold on to his anger, to stoke it back into a righteous fire. "You had that coming," he managed to say, but the words lacked the conviction they'd had moments before. They sounded petulant and weak in the cavernous ballroom. Sophia slowly lowered her hand from her chest. She took a single, deliberate breath, and it was as if she was drawing all the strength in the room into herself. Her spine straightened. The tremor in her voice vanished. When she spoke again, it was with a chilling, almost unnerving calm. "No, Nathan," she said, her gaze pinning him in place. "You have no idea what's coming." A shiver, cold and unwelcome, traced its way down his spine. The power dynamic was shifting, and he could feel it slipping through his fingers. He had thrown his one big punch, and she was still standing. More than standing, she was gathering herself, her shock transmuting into something far more formidable. A portly man in a Brioni suit stepped forward, his face a mask of indignation. "Security. Someone call security." A woman who had been chatting with Sophia moments before was now dabbing at the stain with a cocktail napkin, making sympathetic noises. But her eyes kept darting toward Nathan with undisguised contempt. He was an infection in their pristine, hermetically sealed world, and they were desperate to expel him. Nathan felt a sudden desperate urge to flee. The ballroom, which had seemed like a stage for his triumph, now felt like a greenage. And the opulent decor, the glittering chandeliers, the sea of judging faces, it was all closing in on him. He had miscalculated. He had thought this would be a private act of war, but he had declared it in the middle of Grand Central Station. He had wanted to expose her, but he had only exposed his own pathetic, gnawing envy. He took a half step back, his throat suddenly dry. He needed to leave. He needed to disappear before this got any worse. He had made his point. He could retreat now, lick his wounds, and replay his moment of victory in his mind for years to come. But he couldn't move. He was rooted to the spot by Sophia's unwavering stare and the suffocating weight of 100 silent judgments. He had started a fire, and now he was trapped in the center of the blaze, realizing with dawning horror that he was the only one who was going to get burned. It was in that moment of paralyzed regret, with the smell of soured wine and social ruin hanging in the air, that the crowd near the grand entrance began to part. The whispers changed in tone from scandalized to reverent. A new, more powerful energy was sweeping into the room, a presence that commanded attention without demanding it. Nathan, still locked in Sophia's gaze, didn't notice at first. He was too consumed by the disaster of his own making. But Sophia's eyes flickered, shifting to a point over his shoulder. The icy hardness on her face softened for a fraction of a second, replaced by something else. Relief. He finally broke their eye contact and turned, following her gaze toward the entrance. And that's when the floor didn't just fall out from under him. The entire universe did. Walking through the parted sea of New York's elite were two men. They moved with an easy, unhurried authority that made everyone else seem like they were trying too hard. The man on the right was instantly recognizable to anyone who followed city politics or read the front page of the New York Post. Mayor Robert Donnelly, a man whose public persona was as carefully constructed as the skyscrapers that dotted the skyline. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his smile practiced for cameras, but his eyes held the sharp, appraising look of a man who understood the intricate machinery of power. But it was the man on the left who sucked all the oxygen out of Nathan's lungs. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo that probably cost more than Nathan's last 6 months' rent. He had dark hair, lightly salted at the temples, and a face that was handsome, but not in a soft, cinematic way. It was a face carved from granite and ambition, with intelligent, piercing blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. This was a man who didn't just walk into a room. He assessed it, owned it, and filed it away. Nathan knew who he was. Everyone knew who he was. Alistair Finch. Finch wasn't just rich. He was a titan, a name synonymous with global logistics, tech investment, and a kind of quiet, ruthless efficiency that had swallowed his competitors whole. His company, Finch Consolidated, had its logo on shipping containers in every port, satellites in orbit, and server farms in every corner of the globe. He was a kingmaker in politics, a silent partner in media empires, and the kind of man whose casual phone call could make or break a company. He was a billionaire, yes, but that word felt insufficient. He was a force of nature, and he was Sophia's fiancé. The reality hit Nathan like a physical blow. He had known, of course. He'd seen the announcement in a society column online, a small bitter pill he'd swallowed one lonely night. But seeing it in the abstract was one thing. Seeing Alistair Finch in the flesh walking toward the mess Nathan had just created was another entirely. Nathan's blood ran cold. The triumphant rage that had fueled him just minutes ago evaporated, replaced by a primal stomach-churning fear. He was a minnow who had just tried to bite a great white shark, and now the shark, flanked by the chief regulator of the entire ocean, was swimming directly toward him. Finch's eyes, those impossibly sharp blue eyes, scanned the scene. They swept past the gawking onlookers, past the spreading stain on the marble floor, and settled on Sophia. The hard lines of his face softened instantly with concern. He didn't rush, but his pace quickened. The mayor, sensing a private matter, slowed his own step, hanging back with the practiced discretion of a career politician. Alistair reached Sophia's side. He didn't say a word at first. He simply placed a gentle hand on her arm, his thumb stroking her skin reassuringly. Then he shrugged off his tuxedo jacket with a fluid, effortless motion and draped it over her shoulders, covering the horrific stain. It was a gesture of such profound, simple chivalry that it was more damning than any verbal condemnation could ever be. It was an act of protection, of possession, of quiet, unassailable power. He was literally and figuratively covering her from the filth that had been thrown at her. "Are you all right?" Alistair asked, his voice, a low, calm baritone that cut through the lingering whispers. Sophia nodded, leaning into his strength. "I'm fine, Alistair. Just startled." Only then, once he was sure she was okay, did Alistair Finch turn his attention to Nathan. And Nathan Holloway felt his world end. The piercing blue eyes were no longer soft. They were chips of ice. There was no anger in them, no explosive rage. There was something far, far worse: assessment. Alistair Finch was looking at him the same way he would look at a failing subsidiary on a balance sheet. He was a problem to be analyzed, quantified, and solved. Liquidated. Nathan's mind raced desperately, trying to formulate a sentence, an apology, an excuse, but his tongue felt thick and useless in his mouth. He was a child caught with a crayon, having scrawled on a priceless Rembrandt. What could he possibly say? "I know you," Alistair said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, which made it infinitely more terrifying. His voice was still calm, but it had an edge of polished steel. "Nathan Holloway, Vantage Consulting Group. You were married to Sophia." He knew his name. He knew where he worked. The gears of Finch's formidable mind were already turning, connecting dots Nathan hadn't even known existed. The fear in Nathan's stomach curdled into pure dread. This man's memory was a weapon, and it was aimed directly at him. Mayor Donnelly had drifted closer now, his expression a careful mixture of concern for Sophia and official disapproval of the scene. His presence changed the dynamic yet again. This was no longer just a personal dispute. It was now a public disturbance witnessed by the city's highest official. Nathan hadn't just embarrassed his ex-wife, he'd potentially committed an offense in front of the mayor. Nathan felt his rented tuxedo clinging to him, soaked with the cold sweat of sheer panic. He had wanted to make a scene. He had succeeded beyond his wildest nightmares. He had the full undivided attention of Sophia Rossi, her billionaire fiancé, and the mayor of New York City. He was completely, utterly, and irrevocably screwed. The silence that followed Alistair Finch's statement was heavier than any sound. It was the silence of a boardroom before a hostile takeover, the quiet of a courtroom before a verdict. Nathan felt his entire life flashing before his eyes, not the good parts, but the litany of small failures, compromises, and resentments that had led him to this single catastrophic moment. Alistair took a half step forward, closing the distance between them. He was taller than Nathan, broader in the shoulders. He didn't use his size to intimidate, yet his presence was overwhelming. He smelled faintly of cedar and success. "Did you do this?" Alistair asked. The question was soft, almost conversational, yet it carried the weight of an accusation from which there was no appeal. Nathan opened his mouth, but only a dry, croaking sound came out. He nodded, a pathetic, jerky motion of his head. Alistair's gaze didn't waver. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "May I ask why?" The why was a labyrinth of shame, jealousy, and self-delusion. How could he possibly explain the years of festering bitterness? Because she left me, because she's happy, and I'm not, because she outgrew me. Every possible answer sounded like the pathetic whine of a loser. "It was a misunderstanding," Nathan stammered the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. A muscle in Alistair's jaw twitched. It was the only outward sign of his anger. "It looks quite understood to me," he said, his voice dropping. Another register, becoming a quiet, menacing hum. "It looks like you assaulted my fiancée at a public event. It looks like you have a problem with impulse control. And it looks like you've made the single biggest mistake of your professional and personal life." Each sentence was a perfectly placed nail in the coffin of Nathan's future. From the corner of his eye, Nathan saw a man in a dark suit with an earpiece materialize at Alistair's elbow. This was not hotel security. This was Mr. Graves Finch's head of personal security, a man whose previous career in a government agency was the subject of much hushed speculation. Graves's eyes were flat and emotionless. He was waiting for a command. Mayor Donnelly finally stepped forward, placing a hand on Alistair's arm. "Alistair, let's not let this unfortunate incident ruin the evening for everyone. Perhaps hotel security can handle this quietly." The mayor was trying to de-escalate to manage the potential political and social fallout of a public brawl involving one of the city's most powerful figures. Alistair didn't even look at the mayor, but he acknowledged him with a slight nod. He turned his head slightly toward Mr. Graves. "Mr. Graves, please find out where Mr. Holloway is staying tonight. Find out where he works, who his superiors are, and which clients are most important to his firm. I want a full report on my desk by morning. Then please escort him from the premises. Ensure he doesn't speak to anyone on his way out." The instructions were delivered with the dispassionate precision of a surgeon ordering scalpels. It wasn't a threat of a fistfight. It was a threat of complete and total annihilation, executed through paperwork, phone calls, and the invisible levers of power that Alistair Finch controlled. It was 1,000 times more terrifying than a punch. Nathan felt a wave of nausea. His career, his livelihood, the fragile scaffolding of the life he'd tried to build. Post-divorce, Alistair was going to burn it all to the ground, and he wouldn't even have to raise his voice to do it. Mr. Graves nodded once. "Sir?" He then turned his dead-eyed gaze on Nathan. But before Graves could take a step, Sophia spoke. Her voice cut through the tension, clear and strong. She had shrugged Alistair's jacket more firmly onto her shoulders, like a piece of armor. The shock had completely receded from her face, replaced by a look of profound, sorrowful clarity. "Wait," she said. Alistair and Graves both looked at her. "He thinks I owe him this," Sophia said, gesturing toward her own imagined success. The Gala, Alistair, all of it. "He tells himself a story where he's the victim. The noble spurned husband who funded my rise to glory before I cast him aside for someone better." She took a step toward Nathan, her eyes locking onto his. There was no anger left in them, only a deep, profound pity that was somehow more scolding than her fury. "You want to know what you're owed, Nathan?" she asked, her voice ringing with conviction. "You want to talk about debts in front of all these people? Then let's talk about the real debt." Nathan's heart pounded. He had no idea what she was talking about. He had always been the one who was wronged. He was the one who had sacrificed. "Let's talk about the 75,000, Sophia said, her voice dropping, yet every person in the silent listening circle heard it clearly. "The down payment for our first home, the money we saved for 6 years, the money my parents gave us as a wedding gift. Let's talk about that, Nathan." Nathan's blood turned to ice water. No, not that. She wouldn't, but she would. He had pushed her past the point of protecting his secrets. He had thrown his last stone, and in response, she was about to drop a mountain on him. The number hung in the air, precise and damning. $75,000. It wasn't a billion-dollar figure like the ones associated with Alistair Finch, but in the context of Nathan and Sophia's shared history, it was a fortune. It was the sum of all their hopes. Nathan's face went white. He felt the blood drain from his head, a dizzying, sickening sensation. This was the one secret he thought was buried forever, a truth sealed by the quiet dignity of their divorce proceedings, a truth Sophia had promised to keep. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered the lie, weak and transparent even to his own ears. Sophia let out a short, mirthless laugh. It was a brittle, heartbreaking sound. "Oh, you know, Nathan, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You just never thought I'd say it out loud. You counted on my shame, my discretion, the same discretion that allowed you to walk away from our marriage with your pride intact, telling everyone who would listen that I left you for shinier things." She took another step closer, and the crowd, rapt and silent, seemed to lean in collectively. This was no longer just a spectacle. It was a confession, a trial. "He tells people he paid for my education," Sophia announced, her voice gaining strength, projecting to the silent onlookers. "The truth is, my parents paid for my master's degree. Nathan paid our rent, and I am grateful for that. We were a partnership. But while I was studying and working an unpaid internship, and he was working his consulting job, we were saving every spare dollar for a down payment on a small house in Westchester, a place with a garden. It was our dream." Her gaze drifted for a moment, lost in a memory that was now clearly painful. Alistair watched her, his expression unreadable, but his hand resting protectively on the small of her back. "Then," Sophia continued, her eyes snapping back to Nathan, hard and bright, "a colleague of Nathan's from his old firm, a man named Mark Renshaw, came to him with a sure thing, a can't-miss investment in a biotech startup that was going to revolutionize everything. It was high risk, but the payoff was supposed to be astronomical. I said no. I begged him not to. Our dream was tangible. It was in a savings account. It was real." Nathan wanted to disappear. He wanted the marble floor to crack open and swallow him whole. He could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on him, a physical weight of judgment. He remembered that argument, the pleading in Sophia's voice, and his own arrogant dismissal of her fears. He had called her timid, afraid of success. "He went behind my back." Sophia's voice was sharp as broken glass. "He took the entire $75,000 out of our joint account and put it all on this sure thing. He was going to surprise me, you see. He wasn't just going to buy us a house. He was going to make us rich. he was going to be the hero. A low murmur went through the crowd. This was a story they understood, not the specific numbers, but the hubris, the gamble. 6 weeks later, Sophia said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, the startup was exposed as a complete fraud. A shell company. The founders disappeared. The money was gone. All of it. Our entire future vanished. She paused, letting the weight of that failure settle over the room. Nathan couldn't look at her. He stared at his shoes, the polished leather seeming to mock him. That, Sophia said, her voice rising again, with righteous, long-suppressed anger, is why we ended Nathan. Not because my career took off. Not because I met other people. It's because you didn't just lose our money. You shattered my trust. You gambled away our shared dream because your ego was more important than our partnership. And the worst part, the most unforgivable part. She was right in front of him now, her eyes boring into his. You never even apologized. You just got angry. You got bitter. You blamed the world. You blamed me. It was easier to pretend I was a social climbing gold digger than to admit you were a fool who lost everything. She finally stopped. The indictment was complete. She had taken the narrative he had so carefully constructed for himself and for others and dismantled it piece by piece, leaving only the ugly, pathetic truth. He wasn't the wronged party. He was the architect of his own misery. He had thrown a glass of wine to stain her dress. In return, she had laid his entire soul bare, exposing a stain so deep it could never be washed away. Alistair Finch had not moved. He had simply listened, his expression a mask of cold fury on Sophia's behalf. He looked from Sophia's pained face to Nathan's broken one. The assessment in his eyes was complete. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod to Mr. Graves. The security chief stepped forward and placed a firm, unyielding hand on Nathan's bicep. The grip was like iron. This way, sir, Graves said, his voice polite but brooks no argument. Nathan was paralyzed. He had no fight left in him. Sophia had taken it all. As Graves began to steer him away from the circle of horror, he looked up one last time. He saw Mayor Donnelly looking at him not with anger, but with something worse, utter disdain. He saw the faces in the crowd, a mixture of pity and contempt, and he saw Sophia. She was leaning back into Alistair Finch, who wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close and whispering something in her ear. She buried her face in his chest, her shoulders finally starting to shake. She wasn't a goddess on a pedestal anymore. She was a woman who had just relived the worst moment of her life, and she was being comforted by the man who represented everything Nathan had failed to be: strong, trustworthy, and protective. As Mr. Graves marched him toward the exit, past a sea of averted eyes and scornful whispers, Nathan Holloway finally understood. He hadn't just lost his wife or his money or his pride. Tonight, in the heart of the city's glittering elite, he had lost the last thing he had left, the lie he told himself. The exit from the Pierre was a blur of shame. Mr. Graves did not shove or manhandle him. His methods were far more psychologically effective. He guided Nathan with an implacable pressure on his arm, his large frame acting as a shield, preventing anyone from speaking to Nathan, and more importantly, preventing Nathan from making his escape any more dramatic. They bypassed the grand lobby, taking a series of service corridors that smelled of bleach and cooking oil, a fitting route for his social demotion. He was deposited onto the sidewalk of East 61st Street. A black SUV with tinted windows was idling at the curb. Mr. Graves opened the rear door. "Get in, Mr. Holloway. We'll see you home." It wasn't a request. The ride was silent and terrifying. Nathan sat on the plush leather, his rented tux, feeling like a costume for a play that had ended in disaster. He didn't know if he was being taken home or being taken somewhere to be taught a lesson in a more permanent way. But the SUV pulled up smoothly in front of his generic, soulless apartment building in Murray Hill. "Have a pleasant evening," Mr. Graves said, his voice devoid of any sincerity. As Nathan stumbled out onto the pavement, the SUV pulled away with a quiet hiss, disappearing into the city's endless traffic. The threat was clear. We know where you live. The next 72 hours were a masterclass in silent systemic destruction. Alistair Finch's revenge was not loud or violent. It was a quiet, suffocating avalanche of consequences. The first call came at 9:15 a.m. the next morning. It was from David Chen, the senior partner at Vantage Consulting. His voice was cold, stripped of its usual feigned collegiality. Nathan, I've just had a very troubling conversation with our contacts at the mayor's office, and a subsequent, even more troubling one with legal counsel for Finch Consolidated. Nathan's blood ran cold. David, I can explain. No, you can't. Chen cut him off. I don't even want to hear it. Finch Consolidated is pulling the Sterling Reed account. They're a silent majority partner in Sterling Reed's parent company. You know what that account is worth to us, Nathan? It's 15% of our annual revenue. Nathan felt dizzy. He had no idea Finch had any connection to Sterling Reed, one of his firm's cornerstone clients. Furthermore, Chen continued, his voice dripping with venom, they've made it clear to our board that any firm employing you will find it difficult to secure contracts with any of their 200 subsidiary companies, or any company that wishes to do business with them, which in this city is basically every company. It was a corporate death sentence. He had been professionally blacklisted at the highest level. Clean out your desk, Chen said. HR will have a severance box couriered to you. Your network access has already been revoked. Don't call me again. The line went dead. He was fired. Just like that. The second blow landed the following afternoon. An email from the management company of his apartment building. It was a formal notice of lease termination. The clause they cited was behavior unbecoming and detrimental to the community's reputation. It was a flimsy pretext, but he knew exactly where the pressure had come from. Alistair Finch likely owned the real estate investment trust that held the deed to the building. He was being evicted. The foundations of his life were being removed one by one. His job, his home. The third cut was the deepest and most personal. He received a call from his younger sister Jenna. She sounded distraught. Nate, what did you do? She cried. Dad just called me. He got a call from a Mr. Graves. Something about you causing a major incident at a charity event. Nathan's heart sank. Jenna, it's complicated. Complicated, Dad's little accounting firm does the books for a small catering company, Elegant Edibles or something. Apparently, this Mr. Graves informed Dad that Elegant Edibles' primary client is Alistair Finch, and that their contract was under review. They strongly suggested the caterer find a new accounting firm, one with no association to the Holloway name, if they wanted to keep that contract. Nathan felt sick. They were going after his family, not directly, but by poisoning the ground all around them. His father, a man nearing retirement, was now at risk of losing business because of him. Nate. Dad was so shaken, Jenna whispered. He asked me what happened with you and Sophia. The real story. I didn't know what to say. The story. It always came back to the story. The false narrative he had peddled for years had finally collapsed, and the fallout was scorching everyone he cared about. He spent the rest of the day in a daze, his small apartment feeling like a prison cell. He turned on the TV for some distraction, flipping to a local news channel. And there she was, Sophia. She was standing on the steps of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Alistair Finch by her side. They were announcing a new philanthropic initiative, the Finch Rossi, grant for emerging artists funded by a personal endowment of $50 million. Alistair's arm was around her, his tuxedo jacket from the Gala long gone replaced by a new powerful suit. Sophia was wearing a simple, elegant navy blue dress. She looked serene, strong, and forward-looking. She spoke eloquently about providing young artists with the kind of support and trust that is so crucial in the early stages of a career. The irony was a physical blow. While his life was being systematically dismantled because of a debt he refused to acknowledge, she was on the steps of the Met, creating a legacy of opportunity built on trust. Alistair wasn't just her fiancé, he was her partner in a way Nathan had never been able to be. He amplified her passions. Nathan had only tried to stifle them. The reporter asked Alistair a question. Mr. Finch, there were rumours of a slight disturbance at the benefactor's gala the other night. Can you comment? Alistair smiled a cool, dismissive smile. The only thing I recall from that wonderful evening is being overwhelmed by the generosity of this city and being reminded once again of how proud I am of my fiancée and the incredible work she does. We're here to talk about the future, not minor distractions. He didn't even give Nathan the dignity of being a villain. He was a minor distraction, an insignificant footnote, that more than anything was the final twist of the knife. He wasn't even a worthy adversary. He was nothing. The quiet collapse was complete. A week later, Nathan found himself in a place that was the spiritual and geographical antithesis of the grand ballroom at the Pierre. It was a no-name bar off the Roosevelt Avenue Jackson Heights station in Queens, a place where conversations were held in 3 different languages and nobody cared about your last name. The floor had a permanent stickiness. The air was thick with the smell of fried onions and stale beer, and the only glittering lights came from the lottery machine in the corner. He was a ghost, haunting a life that was no longer his. His home was a drab room at a motel near LaGuardia, a place that smelled of industrial cleaner and quiet desperation. The thin walls offered no defense against the sounds of strangers' arguments or the roar of planes taking off, each one a mocking reminder of a world that was moving on without him. He'd spent the last few days packing his life into cardboard boxes, a sad inventory of a mediocre existence. Business books he'd never finished, a faded photo of his college lacrosse team clothes that now seemed to belong to a more optimistic stranger. His phone had become a monument to his own isolation. He would scroll through the contacts, a digital graveyard of dead connections. David Chen, his former boss, marked with a mental skull and crossbones. Mark Renshaw, the friend who'd sold him on the fraudulent biotech scheme all those years ago. Nathan had tried calling him out of some morbid curiosity, only to find the number disconnected. Old colleagues from Vantage. He'd reached out to one Greg, a guy he used to grab lunch with twice a week. The call was brief and excruciating. Nate, hey, Greg had said, his voice strained. Listen, now's not a good time. Greg, I just need to know what they're saying. They're saying you're finished, man. Greg had cut in, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. The word from on high is that you're poison. Finch's reach. It's insane. Nobody's going to touch you. I'm sorry. I've got a family, Nate. I can't be seen talking to you. The click of the disconnected call was louder than any shout. Now, sitting at the bar, Nathan stared into his glass of whiskey. He saw his own reflection in the cheap, thick glass. A man hollowed out his eyes, vacant, the ghost of a rented tuxedo, still clinging to his slumped shoulders. The lies were all gone, stripped away by Sophia's devastating speech and the surgical precision of Alistair's revenge. All that remained was the raw, undeniable truth, and it was a bitter drink to swallow. He wasn't the victim, he was the saboteur of his own life. The memory of the argument about the $75,000 played in his head on a loop, no longer filtered through his ego. He could hear his own voice, arrogant and dismissive. It takes money to make money, Soph. You have to be bold. You can't be afraid of success. He remembered the look on her face, not fear of success, but fear of his recklessness. A fear that had been tragically vindicated. He had called her timid, when in fact she had been wise. He had called himself a visionary, when in fact he had been a fool. And for years, he had made her pay for his foolishness. He had used her grace, her quiet agreement, to keep his secret as a weapon against her, twisting it into evidence that she was the one who was cold and transactional. The bartender, a burly man with a weary face, changed the channel on the small TV mounted above the bar. It flickered from a soccer game to a local entertainment news program. Nathan groaned, wanting to tell him to change it back, but he was frozen. There they were. The segment was titled Power Philanthropy and Passion, The Rise of Finch Rossi. It showed clips from the press conference at the Met Sophia, speaking eloquently about the new grant. Then it cut to paparazzi footage, shot just a day or two ago. Alistair and Sophia were walking out of a small, independent art gallery in Chelsea. She was talking animatedly, using her hands to describe something she had clearly loved inside. Alistair wasn't looking at the street or the cameras. He was looking only at her. His head tilted, a small, genuine smile on his face. It wasn't the smile of a billionaire indulging his fiancée. It was the look of a man utterly captivated by his partner's intellect and passion. He saw her fire not as a threat, but as the most compelling thing about her. The reporter's voiceover was nauseatingly effusive. Solidifying their status as New York's newest power couple, Alistair Finch and Sophia Rossi are proving that their partnership is about more than just wealth. It's about a shared vision for the future of art and culture in the city. In that moment, watching them, Nathan finally understood the vast, unbridgeable chasm between himself and Alistair Finch. It wasn't the money, it was the character. Alistair built things, empires, futures, confidence. Nathan had only ever known how to tear them down, starting with his own. Alistair's power gave Sophia a larger canvas on which to paint. Nathan's insecurity had tried to snatch the brush from her hand. A profound and bottomless shame washed over him. It wasn't about the lost job or the apartment anymore. It was about the squandered love, the broken trust, and the man he had failed to be. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over Sophia's name, which he had never deleted. He began to type a text, his fingers clumsy. Sophia, I'm so sorry. You were right about everything. I was the fool. I ruined us. I know I don't deserve it, but I hope one day you can forgive. He stared at the pathetic words on the screen. Forgive him. What right did he have to ask for absolution? His apology was a selfish plea to lessen his own burden, not a genuine act of atonement. It was just another thing he wanted from her. With a deep, shuddering breath, he deleted the entire message. He couldn't fix the past. He couldn't apologize to Sophia, not in a way that mattered. But maybe, just maybe, he could stop the poison from spreading. He had to clean up his own mess, starting with the people he had dragged into his fallout. He scrolled to his sister's name, Jenna. His heart hammered against his ribs. He thought about his father, a quiet, decent man, now having to worry about his small business because of his son's monstrous pride. Taking a final gulp of whiskey that burned all the way down, Nathan pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. He almost hung up. Hello. Jenna's voice was cautious, wary. He closed his eyes. The noisy Queen's bar faded away. There was only the sound of his own breathing and the voice of his sister, waiting. Jenna. He said, his own voice, cracking unfamiliar to his own ears. It was the voice of a broken man. It's Nate. I need to tell you and Dad what really happened. And I need you to know Sophia was telling the truth. He didn't know if it was the beginning of forgiveness or just the start of a long, painful confession. But for the first time in years, Nathan Holloway wasn't telling a story. He was facing the truth. And in the ruins of his life, it was the only foundation he had left to build upon. So what happens when the private wars we wage with our past erupt in public? Nathan Holloway's story is a brutal lesson in consequences. He thought his anger was his most powerful weapon, but he learned too late that real power doesn't scream. It whispers. It moves silently through boardrooms, emails, and phone calls, dismantling a life with chilling precision. This wasn't just about a thrown drink. It was about the lies we tell ourselves to avoid facing our own failures. Sophia didn't need a billionaire to save her. She saved herself with the one thing Nathan could never defeat, the truth. Whose side were you on when the Merlot hit the dress? Do you think Alistair's revenge was justified, or was it a cruel abuse of power? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of high-stakes drama and the quiet collapse of a man's world, please hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a story with a twist, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. We uncover the hidden dramas behind the headlines every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next.